Hey everyone, it's Clint. Welcome to Sweetcast. I gotta tell you, I am gearing up. I want to make sure I am ready to fulfill this crowdfunding campaign, Downcast. It's getting real. It's weird because I'll go through these phases of super excited just to see the book in print, and I just get giddy. I get giddy like a grown man would get giddy. And then at other times I'm just like, oh man, what's everybody going to think? I hope everyone likes it. I hope, you know, all this kind of stuff. And so, yeah, it's just interesting. The roller coaster of emotions. And I'll tell you, I was nothing like this when I published, I wrote 2 novels. When I published those, it was nothing like it because for some reason, I like those novels, I didn't expect people to read. So strange. Like you put them out there. The first of those novels actually got read a lot. It was kind of amazing. Second one didn't, things changed a little bit and people didn't read it as much. So it was more difficult to get it out into people's hands. Anyway, so with Downcast, it's just, man, I know that there's a lot of people that are waiting for it and looking forward to it. So I'm going to really make sure that we take our time. Take what we need to take, the time we need to take, make sure the edit is done well. And in the meantime, I'm preparing. This is how serious I am. I've got Dymo label writer 4XL. So this way I can, print off shipping labels and get it all done. I am not going to fulfillment center. Why? Because I want to keep some money. So I'm the fulfillment center. And I don't know, this will be nice because I'm thinking in the future, I hope if you allow me to, I'm going to be doing a whole lot more of this kind of stuff and fulfilling it and taking the work into my own hands. I'm not afraid to do the work. So that was just a quick update. All right, bounding into comics. Here's the thing. This is a rumor. You'll see often these articles that say that there's a rumor. It says rumor first. So I don't know how much of this is true or not, but it's like believable enough that who knows. We'll just go with the headline here. Disney wants to buy Spider-Man outright from Sony for $4 billion plus. Is Spider-Man worth $4 billion plus? Now, I don't know if this is obviously just the movie rights, right? Yeah, because Disney already owns Spider-Man as far as the comics go, and I'm sure in a lot of other capacities, but Disney does not own the movie rights to Spider-Man. And so in this case, Spider-Man is worth a lot. He's worth a lot to Disney also because he was so pivotal in their next plans for their superhero films, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Absolutely, Spider-Man's worth a lot of money. $4 billion worth? Maybe. Quite possibly. You're going to be able to make films out of Spider-Man continuously forever, essentially until Disney sells out, I guess. But what makes intellectual property worth so much money? I've had this discussion often, been thinking about it quite a bit actually lately as I'm getting into doing my own publishing and things like that. And so it's been really interesting. For example, here, if you follow Doug TenNapel at all, this is Bigfoot Bill. He had this graphic novel. It was very, very successful. I would consider this very, very successful. $196,000 on Bigfoot Bill. Bigfoot Bill is a new property. You might even say that there are some similarities with Earthworm Jim, right? Maybe he's a little bit derivative of Earthworm Jim. Big difference is, though, that Bigfoot Bill is new IP, new intellectual property. No one else has the rights to but Doug TenNapel, obviously, as far as I'm aware. And really, this campaign, it says it ended in 2018, but the thing is, it really ended in the spring of 2019 because I backed this book. It was the end of the in-demand phase. I backed this book. I got the book. And then soon after, it was like a month or two later, he launched his next project, which was Earthworm Jim. And Earthworm Jim raised $816,000, which is just mind-boggling. 9,000 backers. That is crazy. How many backers did they have on the first one? 3,300 to all the way up to 9,000. That is insane. So many backers. And this really illustrates, both of these campaigns were sold essentially in the same time frame. Obviously, one was a little sooner, one was a little later. The big difference here, though, it's not the creative team. It's not anything else. This is a nice controlled experiment, except for that one thing, which is intellectual property. How much is an Earthworm Jim comic book worth? That is a great question. How much is that intellectual property worth? I don't know. Probably not 4 billion, I would say. Probably not at that level, but it's worth a lot. I would say in the multi-millions, because if you can make almost $1 million off of one comic book, one book, then certainly there's so many ways to exploit it and to make more money off of it. So I played with this idea quite a bit, and people will tell you, the goal is not to write somebody else's book, right? You don't want to actually write Spider-Man or Batman or anything like that, because it's somebody else's property. Okay, well, you want to be making your own stuff, so you have something that you can keep. And that's awesome. I totally believe in that. However, it does take some kind of equation, some kind of right set of circumstances to actually create a lasting IP that's going to actually be worth money in the long run. You think of all of the brand new books by new creators, not just books, in other kinds of mediums, and far and wide, most of the new intellectual property that's created is not worth anything. And it doesn't really matter that you'd own it, because it's just not worth anything. It's like my second novel, All for Owen. I could go and do a comic version of that book, but it wouldn't sell any better. I really doubt that. And that's because the intellectual property for the first one, it just, I guess, hasn't been developed. It didn't catch on. I mean, there's so many other things. You've seen it over and over a million of times. So the reason I bring this up, the reason I've really been thinking about a little bit more is, possibly there are going to be opportunities for me to write properties that already exist that I don't own, but they might also be good opportunities, right? To get your name on things and to play around in another world, things like that. And there's also the downside of you don't own it, right? So one of my pie in the sky ideas is a Tomb Raider story. I'd love to do a Tomb Raider comic book because I already have the perfect idea. Just give me like a 6-issue miniseries and I could do it. It'd be great. Dark Horse, if you're listening. But Tomb Raider is such a great example because you look at Tomb Raider and it actually is derivative of something else. Here's a little clip from Nick930. I'm just going to play a little bit of this, the history of Tomb Raider, because this video just did a great job of laying out the history. I'm going to play a little clip for you and you might find this interesting.
To answer that, we need to go way back to the franchise's first entry, Tomb Raider. In 1996, gaming publisher Eidos Interactive acquired the small 6-man English development studio called Core Design. Core Design had been hard at work since 1993 on a new action-adventure title that aimed to let players explore a full 3D environment. The game would borrow several elements from the popular Indiana Jones films, including a male character that used a whip as a weapon and tool. After being advised to change the character to avoid copyright concerns, Toby Gard and the rest of Core eventually landed on the concept of Lara Croft, a decision that would help to build Tomb Raider's legendary status among classic gaming franchises.
All right, so you heard it right there. Tomb Raider is actually derivative itself. It is based off of Indiana Jones. This shouldn't be a revelation, right? It's obvious the similarities are so strong. They made some important changes so that it would truly be a different character than Indiana Jones. But in and of itself, this is an intellectual property that they wanted to make, but they had to change things enough so it was unique. And in this case, this is one of the cases where they were extremely successful, and Tomb Raider, especially for video games, has been a really successful franchise. I know for comics it's around as well, movies obviously, and I'm sure as the years go by, this IP will ebb and flow in its popularity. But there you go. That's one example of developing new intellectual property, derivative of another idea. Okay, so another one. If you look at the similarities between Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Daredevil, it's actually no accident, right? I interviewed Kevin Eastman on this channel. If you haven't watched that video, I strongly recommend it. It was really great to talk to him. And doing research with him and talking to him a little bit, It was something that he really liked. Him and Peter Laird. They loved Daredevil. They loved Frank Miller, and they wanted to sort of emulate those things. So they made some differences, obviously some pretty big differences. But in the story itself, there are even some things that are just so close. You have Master Splinter versus Master Stick. You have the foot versus the hand. And yeah, similar origin, I suppose. And so there are some similarities, and then they developed the IP though, and it has grown out of that and become its own thing. Not only has it become its own thing, but now you'll find other things that are derivative of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It's kind of amazing how much this happens in really obvious ways. And you could name any number of titles that are trying to emulate the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and are somewhat derivative, but they're also making their own IP. But what does it take? This is Downcast. This is my own IP. But it still takes a lot of development in order to make it worth money. Now, at the moment, I wouldn't even know what it's worth, because the book has to get shipped, right? I've been talking about that. You got to ship the book out. You got to get people to read it, and people have to like it and want to continue living in this world that I've created. And so, yeah, and building it out and however big it ends up being as far as intellectual property goes, it's hard to know. And that's ultimately, it's up to fans to decide, readers to decide what it becomes, what catches on. Could you imagine all of the work that was put into Spider-Man in order to make it worth, some say, $4 billion just for the movie rights? That's not including everything else that it could be included in those kind of rights. Spider-Man as intellectual property as a whole has got to be worth much, much more. But Spider-Man has just decades and decades of so many creative people working on it, has such a rich history. It has the nostalgia factor, right? So many people have already grown up with Spider-Man, and they love Spider-Man. They've seen him everywhere and all the merchandising that's taken place, and he's become a household name. Obviously, he's been a household name for quite a long time, and he's just built in to American culture, and I would even say Western culture or world culture. So really, how realistic is it that you can create a new IP and it's really going to be something that big? It's mind-blowing to think about. And I think Spider-Man is about at the top of the rung as far as intellectual property goes. I wouldn't even shoot for that. Tomb Raider is another example. Ninja Turtles is another example. All sorts of examples of heights that could be reached, but it obviously would take a lot of work. It would take a lot of investment into that intellectual property. And ultimately, that's why it ends up being worth so much money. Now, I'm not saying I have any opportunities. It's just Downcast opens up opportunities. And, I wrote that Silver Streak story. It was really fun to write an existing property, but it's, Creative Commons, what's the word? Public domain. So anybody could technically write a Silver Streak story as long as you're using all the original stuff for it. And so, yeah, I don't know, it just gets me thinking. Another example I would think of is John Malin, for example. He's got a book called Graveyard Shift. He's on volume 2 right now. And so Graveyard Shift, if he were to stop at volume 2 and turn around and just give it away, right? Somebody else is going to be doing the next Graveyard Shift. How many people that have bought those first 2 volumes of Graveyard Shift would want to go over to the new creator just because of Graveyard Shift? Like, that's the only reason they're following those characters, that IP, because of what it is. I don't know the answer to that question, because I'm guessing that John Malin is probably wouldn't give away Graveyard Shift. He's still going to be developing that IP. But yeah, got me thinking more about, why do you buy comics? Why do you follow certain characters? I know a lot of the cases I will follow certain writers from book to book to book into series that I'm not generally super interested in. Much less so I will follow artists, though sometimes I will do that, like with Phil Noto. He's one example where I just want to buy his covers because they're amazing. But mostly, generally speaking, I actually follow the IP. If I'm interested in reading Spider-Man, or I'm interested in reading Batman because it It's the world that you get to escape into and you get to experience it a little bit. I'm not necessarily going to be as picky with the writers. I just want to get in there and live in that world. And so hopefully those writers are doing it justice. I'm going to do a little bit of research and try to find a good Batman book if I'm going back into the back catalog of something I haven't read. This is why you'll hear so many people say it's not you, it's Batman, right? If you're writing Batman or doing the art for Batman and you're getting lots and lots of sales, and then you move over and do your own new IP, you might pull some fans over. That's absolutely possible. However, it's most likely not going to be as big of a success because you're not working on that intellectual property. So what's the trade-off? I don't know. I mean, there's so many specifics that you'd have to get into. But anyways, that's about it. I know this is one of those videos where I have more questions than answers. That happens often, but it is interesting, and I want to know what you have to say about it. How valuable is intellectual property? What stories that are existing, what IP would you want to be on the creative team for? What are some of your ideas of really developing intellectual property into something bigger than just one book, perhaps? And while you're at it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Anything else you can do, that would be awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and I will see you next time.